Well, a little talk of horrors, little talk of terror, little talk of horrors, whoa. We gonna talk a little horror, we gonna talk a little terror, we gonna talk a little horrors, whoa. Shudder-ding, da-da-ding, da-ding-a-ding away. Look out, shudder not, boop, ba-ba-dee-doo, better way. Wah. You better run up everywhere, you better run up everywhere, you better run up everywhere, I'm gonna tell about a little talk of horrors, little talk a little terror, little talk of horrors, whoa. Dancing.
Little Talk of Horrors is brought to you by the Wash Away Seed&Spark campaign. Support indie horror. When you pre-order the already finished feature-length film, Romeo's Distress on Blu-ray, you are directly contributing to the budget of our next feature-length film, Wash Away. Help us make more punk rock movies. Watch the trailer for Romeo's Distress right now.
Cheesecake of love, cheesecake.
Uncle Elmo, have you ever been in love?
Well, there you go on the love thing again. You're always speaking of it. It seems to be the reason behind the actions you've taken.
I even try to forget about her, but I just can't.
What is more important than love?
Nothing.
That's right.
Nothing is more important than love.
That's right. You must just seize the day. Carpe diem.
Carpe diem.
No, scream it. Carpe diem!
I think it's time that we acted.
Like what we talked about.
Family. Can you really put a price on something like that? On your family's security?
I know you're up to something, huh?
How hard can we really go on them, you know?
As hard as we want.
You can do whatever you want to me, but it will never change the fact how much I care about your daughter.
Welcome to Little Talk of Horrors. This is our first official episode, and I am so beyond honored that our guest has agreed to join us for the show. It is one Graham Skipper, who is writer, director, actor, producer extraordinaire. He does a little bit of everything, and he has quite an interesting career. And he is here with me right now. Graham, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for being on. And I believe congratulations are due for Graham because Graham's brand new film that he wrote, directed, and produced is officially available on Shudder. It's called Sequence Break, and I've just watched it, and it is a fantastic film, and it is really cool that it's on Shudder. Shudder is a great service. If you're not familiar with it, Shudder is basically the Netflix of horror. I am a really, really happy subscriber. For less than $50 for the year, I basically have tons and tons of movies at my fingertips, some of which are respected classics that, you know, I want to see, but I don't want to necessarily pay the $50 to like own it in a box set. I just really want to view it. And this is a great way to do that. You get to see so many revered films, so many exclusives, so many things directly through this app. And they just really have their finger to the pulse in horror, if you ask me. And so Graham's movie is now out. It's an exclusive, right, Graham?
It is a Shudder exclusive, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So you can only see it on Shudder, folks. And boy, this is if you're on the hunt for the latest sort of genre fare, look no further. This is one of those films where you're just like, you hear all your friends talking about it, I gotta see it, and so yeah. So Graham, let's talk about Sequence Break actually first before we dive back into your career. Folks, we're about to get really spoilery right now. Okay, we are talking about Sequence Break. So, Graham, this is your debut film as a writer-director, correct?
Yes.
And where did this idea originate? What is the seed of this film?
Something like 15 years ago, quite a long time ago, I read online about an urban legend about basically a killer arcade game called Polybius. And I read it, and I remember, it was an interesting story, but as urban legends go, a lot of the details were sort of mixed up. But the gist of it is that there was a mysterious arcade machine that was up in the Pacific Northwest somewhere back in the 80s, and the people that played it would get hallucinations, or they would have seizures, or they would die. And there was this big mystery about this machine that then eventually just disappeared. And there were elements of it that were like, oh, the government was using it as like a mind control device, and Men in Black and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I read this, and I always thought, oh gosh, that would make a really interesting movie. And throughout the years, I would kind of start writing different versions of that story, but nothing really clicked for me. Like, nothing really felt right. And the seed of Sequence Break as it is now, it sort of came about a few years ago when I was sort of caught in my own life, kind of wondering how one balances the passion of like what you do. Like for me, it's, being an artist and being a filmmaker versus your passion for, your life that you have, which for me is like my life with my wife and my dog, in my house. And sometimes when you have different passions like that, they can sort of pull you apart and sometimes feel like you have to sacrifice one or the other in order to go, full on after what you want. And so as I was struggling with this and wanting to write a movie about this, and my experience with that struggle, I started revisiting the works of Cronenberg, and then it all just hit at once. And I said, oh, this needs to be a body horror movie. And then it needs to have, this is a perfect way to incorporate these elements of this arcade machine. And then everything just kind of slammed together, and I wrote the script pretty quick after that.
Yeah, that is, the Cronenberg is definitely there on the surface. I felt that like instantaneously, and I think it's done in a really wonderful way, where you're like, like you could feel the Cronenbergness of it all. You could feel the body horror, whatever really it's the arcade machine is almost like, it almost has it has like an organic presence to it. And
thanks, yeah.
But I was also reminded of something else, and I don't know how you're going to take this, but this is just how I felt, like just watching it. In all truth, I almost felt like this is how I would describe it. It almost felt, and maybe it's because they did an episode with like the pinballs or something, and it just reminded me of like, playing a game. It reminded me of like an adult David Cronenberg Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that's been stretched out to feature length. It had a similar sort of vibe. And, what I really, I noticed a lot of like sort of filmmaker things. And one of them I noticed is you really managed to tell this story in pretty much a single location without it feeling like it's in a single location. And I thought that was really quite incredible. And I just wanted to know, so what was like the process behind that? Or like what made you, how did you decide to use that as like a storytelling strategy?
Yeah, so as far as the location goes, I'm a big arcade nut myself, as I'm sure you could tell from the movie.
Yeah.
And I live literally down the road from an arcade workshop, just like the one that Oz works in.
Oh.
And I go in there sometimes, because you can go in and you can just play the games just like you can in the movie. And so I sort of went, gosh, this is a really interesting type of character. Somebody who lives in this world. It's such a world of wires and, no sunlight and,
right.
Dust. And there's something so tactile about the world that those people live in. And the fact that you have to be, so you're sort of cocooned in this world of
right.
old out of date technology. So it made me go, gosh, it would be really interesting to see somebody that is, that is a part of this world and hear their story. And then on top of that, I thought, as Oz, as his mind begins to crumble, right, and as he starts to wonder what's real and feel, uncertain of his own reality, I thought, if we can have a space that looks the same at night as it does during the day, that you can really then play around with somebody's concept of time. And obviously in the movie, our own concepts of time and different timelines, that plays a great deal into the movie later on.
Yes,
and
it does.
So and so I thought it would be just really interesting to have, not only is this building firmly, rooted in the past just because of what it's for, but then you also can't even really tell as the days go by, while you're working there. So I just thought that would be sort of interesting, and then that's kind of how the arcade workshop all kind of came together.
Yeah, it was really great. I noticed that, you see her, the girl, you see her outfits change a lot to show that passage of time because we're in one location. And I thought it was just a really subtle touch that, to show, I felt that passage of time, even though we were in the same location. And, what's interesting about the character himself, Oz, it's like he seems overall, it's like being in that shop, he is sort of disconnected from society. He's like more connected to the analog experience. He doesn't have a phone. The girl calls him an antique at one point. And he's sort of like his boss is like, aren't you, don't you want to show this girl around? He doesn't even notice. He's so into his games, it's so into the circuit boards, the motherboards and stuff. And so you really get that sense from the character. Tell me, the name Oz, did that come from anywhere? Was that, because, I immediately was thinking of Wizard of Oz, and I wasn't sure if there was any specific implication behind the name, or if it was you just sort of came upon it. Does it have any significance for you?
Yeah, so it's funny, I was listening to a podcast. I think it was Shockwaves actually, and they were interviewing Osgood Perkins.
Oh my God!
Son. So I was like, oh, Osgood, that is such a cool name, and I knew that people called him Oz for short, and I went, because for me, character names are always really important and also kind of difficult, it's how do you come up with something iconic that's also, realistic? And so anyway, they called him Oz for short, and I went, well, this really is, Oz in this movie really does step into another world.
Yes.
And so I thought it would be appropriate to sort of have this Wizard of Oz reference with, just kind of a cool, unusual name like Osgood.
Okay, this is really funny because, first of all, Shockwaves, if you don't know people out there, Shockwaves, in my opinion, is the single best horror podcast out there. Loyal listener since Killer P.O.V. These guys have great vests. Yeah, they are phenomenal. So if you don't know about Shockwaves, please go check them out. There's a Facebook group, which to me is the gold standard of all Facebook groups in terms of the way they discuss, horror content in general. It's just everybody's they're just above all the bullshit, and I just really like them as a group, and I love their podcast. But when I was watching Sequence Break, all I could think about was Oz Perkins. That I immediately thought of that. I was going, God, what's the name? I was like, what is the name? What's the deal with the name Oz and Osgood? I'm like, this reminds me of when he was on Shockwaves, and they were talking about the new Netflix film, and I Am the Pretty Thing in the House, or something along those lines. And he but I was like, is this a Wizard of Oz reference, or but that was in the back of my mind. That's hilarious that was your inspiration. Truly, that's
funny. Yeah, no, that's true. That's what it was.
Now what's interesting about the character of Oz, though, and this is my other question, is that he really, what adds to using that one location is the fact that Oz really does seem disconnected from society in general. He has no phone. He seems like he is interested only in connecting with an analog experience, and she even calls him an antique. His love interest. I'm sorry, what was her name again in the movie? It's
Tess.
Tess, right? Tess, yes, Tess. Tess calls Tess calls Oz an antique, and I just thought that all really sort of played together, and that he himself, like, that's why he identifies with these old arcade games, it seems. I don't know. But, yes.
Yeah. No, he's definitely, I definitely wanted to drive home the idea that he is somebody that is stuck in the past. That I think to me is a really important element of Oz's journey, is that, he lives present day. This is not a movie set in the 80s. He lives today, but in his heart, he lives, 30 years ago. And I think that's an interesting dynamic for somebody as far as, how do you really move forward in your life when you are by choice, keeping, one foot firmly planted behind you.
And what's so funny, there's a line, the boss at the beginning, he says, oh, you should totally call her. And Oz is like, that's weird. I'm not going to call her. But like, back in the day, I guess, I don't know, like in the 90s and the 80s, it was a social norm to, if you found a girl's number, you could call, because there was no like other way to contact people. And that people, you just sort of, you see it on Seinfeld all the time. It's like, oh, let me get her number. I want to give her a call. And it's like today, it's like, if you don't get a number from someone personally, then to call them, it's kind of weird. Like, it's not,
yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting connection there too, as well. So, and then, was there any thought behind the actual game, like this weird Cronenbergian, like organic, like evil, whatever you want to call it, game? It very much reminded me of Asteroid, and the graphics. I was trying to I'm watching him play the game, and I'm trying to figure out like how do you play this game? Like I can't figure out how to, like, the mechanics of the actual game. Was that part of your intention? Like, you wanted to make it like this, like above my, like this, like. It reaches another plateau of consciousness or something?
Yeah, the game, a lot of the design of the game is based on the game Tempest.
Okay.
Which was a game that in Asteroids is certainly in there as well, and a little bit of Battlezone.
Yeah.
But Tempest, was definitely the primary influence, just because that game, for whatever reason, used to always freak me out as a kid. I think aesthetically it was just something that it was just so kind of strange. But then, in addition to that, we spent, me and the game designer, Neil Jonas, we spent a lot of time talking about what are the mechanics of this game? How do you play this game?
Right.
And we worked it out, and in fact, there are rules, and like it's specific, like when he's playing it, like he's playing it the way it's supposed to be played. But we specifically wanted to make sure that there was nothing like a life bar, or something. Mm-hmm. No point system. Nothing that would, lead you to go, oh, you're doing better or you're doing worse. My sort of analogy to it was, much like in life, you make decisions and you make choices, and some of them help you and some of them hurt you.
Right.
But you don't necessarily get like a ding, ding, ding moment when something good happens. You just kind of hope that it turns out for the best, and you try to, based on experiences, suss out exactly how to make that happen, make that work out for you. And so with the game, I was going, well, it would be cool to have that be sort of reflective of life a little bit. If as you're playing, you're not sure if what you're doing is good or is bad, or is helping your avatar or hurting your avatar. But you got to keep going, and it's not until you fully experience it do you really begin to understand its meaning.
Now, I got to tell you, I was watching this movie, and you've acted in a lot of films and you've been on a lot of sets, but as a first-time writer-director, I have to tell you, I was really, really blown away by some of, I don't know what, the filmmaking in this film is rather exceptional, especially the use of light, especially the use of green light and the use of red light, and the use of the split screen, and how you really used light as a storytelling object. And what I wanted to know was what was like or how much were you thinking about that in the storytelling process when you were making this film?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that was definitely a major focus of my work with my director of photography, Brian Sowell. In the weeks leading up to shooting, we would sit down and look at a whole lot of different inspirations in terms of in terms of visually and aesthetically what we wanted the movie to look like.
Right.
As far as the lights go, I sat down and I wanted to have a motif of red, green, and blue, because those are the colors that make up
RGB.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to sort of start from there as a base, and then we just kind of established a rule that this is a movie about a guy that is sort of his world is beginning to meld completely with that of effectively an RGB console. And so then the light should reflect that. And what you'll notice is that as the movie goes on, it starts more subtle, and then we begin to get these elements of light that don't necessarily have a source to them, but are very bright and vibrant.
Right, like the green outline of the arcade machine, and then he's like red. He's really small on the left-hand side, and he's red. He's a red outline. Very, very good.
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, so that was really the idea. As we also really wanted to have as an element in this, that anytime we saw this light, that we would be unafraid to really go for it. Like we always, would sort of say, what would Argento do? And Argento would, because I think that the normal sort of, thinking, is to try to make it look natural, or is try to, make something subdued, or make it, make something that feels, I don't know what the right word is, to not necessarily go for like a Technicolor look.
Right.
And so whenever, but really, we just wanted to make this something that would, that would really pop, and something that, would be artistically really interesting. And like I said about Argento, what I love about those movies is that it's truly an aesthetic all his own, especially Suspiria. It's such a unique aesthetic, and I never once, I guess the way I'll put it is, I always sort of revel in how artificial it is. I kind of love that. And so I wanted to be unafraid to be a movie, and really go for it, and really, use cinema and cinematic language and visual language in as strong and bold a way as I possibly could.
Well, I have to tell you, as a first-time filmmaker, it was a incredibly smart choice. As someone who watched it, watching you or seeing this film, I thought it was a very smart choice.
Thank you.
Now, what I'm really curious to know, because a lot of this, again, a lot of this, we sort of, I don't know if you want to call it dream logic or surrealism, but we really sort of, the movie does, as you said, it sort of takes we take a trip into an Oz land that is different. And what I'm curious to know is, how much of the story, they say the story is written or can be written 3 times. It's written once in the screenplay, it's written again in production, and then the third time it can be written is in the edit, and sometimes a 4th time in the marketing. And so what I'm curious to know is, how much of this story was found in the edit? Because I'm sitting here and I'm watching these incredible sequences, and I'm thinking, man, did he write that? He wrote that in screenplay form and then filmed it, or did how much of this came out in the edit?
That is a very good question. A lot of it did. What I will say is that all the logic of the movie, for the most part, that logic is all in the script, right? So, in the script, the sort of the divergent timelines and things like that, that's there. But the way that we tell it is very different than what it was in the script. The split screen was not added until the edit, for instance.
Interesting.
Interesting. The way that we sort of discover what happens to Oz at the end and his relationship to the man, that in the script plays out very differently and over a much longer period of time. And in the edit, we sort of condense it down, partially using the split screen, and I just think it's a lot more effective.
It is. It really,
thanks.
it's very effective. It was very effective for me, and I gotta tell you, because I'm watching this movie and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. At first I'm like confused. I'm like, is this guy is this him in the future? Has he traveled back in time? Because the actors are very similar looking. You almost think that is the same actor that's playing Oz. And it just, what you were just talking about, that device answered so many questions that I had as I was watching it as a viewer.
Good. Yeah. I mean, it's a inherently kind of confusing thing. And one of the biggest notes that we got throughout the edit, was, that it can still be heady and interesting and complex, but it needs to be clear.
Right.
How can we edit for as much clarity as possible without sacrificing something being interesting. And so I'm really glad that I think we found the right balance there. And I think that it ends up being a lot, even though maybe for some it's not 100% clear, it's at least a lot more, there's a lot more clarity now than there was originally.
Well, what's amazing about it, and what I think, and when I think of I try to think about what my taste is in films, or if I'm trying to tell a story, is that you should always show instead of tell. And I think that's exactly what you do. You never told me anything. You never ever told me anything, but you showed me with that and allowed me to sort of kind of figure out what is going on. And I have to tell you, the ending, because you Tess and Oz, you sort of build up their relationship, and to use some newfangled terminology that some of you might want to look up on Urban Dictionary if you don't know what this means. I was really obviously shipping Tess and Oz, and really was enjoying their romance. And then stuff happens and that all changes. And, I'm thinking God, how's this thing going to end? And I thought the way that you ended it, the way that last thing that you do, and, sort of this rewind thing, I just was like, what better way? That was the perfect way to end the movie. It's the perfect way to sort of loop us back. And ultimately, because I was trying to think, what is the message of this film? And what I got out of it is that this film, hold on, let me see what I wrote down. I wrote down that I love that the ending is the beginning, and that the movie, it really is about making choices in life. And that's what also I feel like the split screen represents, is that these are just were two different choices. The same thing with, whether he choose to hear his boss at the beginning, go and show the scroll around, or he's so oblivious the first time around. It's just all about what happens if you do A or B, and it plays into what you were saying about designing of the video game, in that that there's no finite, there's no definite way to play the game. It's just sort of I don't know, you're just sort of all over the place. And what I really want to know about is, let's talk about this end sequence. This I just don't even know. First of all, we got the Evil Dead. All I could think of was the Evil Dead vines wrapping around Cheryl.
Yep.
Which I don't know if that was any direct inspiration, but I'm dying to know how you did it. Number one, if you feel like divulging. If you don't, I respect your filmmaker's process if you don't. But I was like, this is friggin' awesome, and the way the wires connect into the brain, and then this thing, people, you have I mean, obviously, if you're watching this right now, hopefully you are not listening if you haven't seen the film. But if you have seen the film, you should really rewatch this again, because it's just so friggin' surreal and just weird and awesome and Cronenbergian, and even Jodorowsky, and I know I just butchered his name, but tell me about that. Tell me about making this sequence.
Thanks. Yeah. So 2001 is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I know that everybody talks about the Jupiter and the Beyond sequences being so crazy and trippy and wild. But for me, what I love so much about it is that, here's a movie that, has led you to a certain place, and then it's given you hints at sort of a greater, mystery. But then it doesn't ease you into the final third of the movie. It rockets you there. It suddenly takes
Right.
you and hurls you, whether you're ready for it or not.
Very true.
And I love ending a movie that way. You know, I love, you know, really giving, you know, making people feel like sweaty and out of breath by the end. And so what I wanted to do with this final sequence was, you know, I went, okay, so, you know, we've seen what happens as Oz plays the game and as Oz tries to feel his way, you know, literally and figuratively through how the game is played.
Right.
And
yes.
Then, and, you know, and then now
Literally.
he is, you know, fully ready for the, you know, now he's determined. He's going to go in. He's going to go get Tess. He's going to beat this thing. You know, what does that look like? And so
Right.
it was a matter of really just taking everything we'd established before and just ramping it up to 1,000. You know, and stuff like the wires. I mean, that's absolutely inspired from Evil Dead. I mean, Evil Dead and Reanimator have some of the best backwards acting.
Oh,
that
we are
you could
going to
ever
talk.
see.
We need to talk all about that after we're done with this Reanimator, by the way.
And so, you know, it was just a lot of reverse animation with the wires. You know, we would
Right.
connect them to Chase and then pull them back, you know, and it was really just, you know, we sat down and we looked at the sequence and we storyboarded it out and we said, you know, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, so that then we could really piece everything together properly in the edit. You know, like the brain, you know, I you know, this idea, and it took a little bit of sort of figuring out how to exactly do this, but I loved the idea of showing this like disembodied brain,
Yeah.
you know, not within a skull, but floating in the black,
Right.
you know, to really help to establish that this is not, you know, Oz getting torn apart Hellraiser style by weird wires. No, this is something happening on a whole other plane.
Yeah, he's getting jacked in.
You know, and that's why like with the melting head, you know, that was one of the first images that came to me for this movie. It was literally a dream that I
How did you do that? Was that done like practically?
Yeah, it was all done practically.
Wow.
So basically what Josh and Sierra Russell, our special effects team, basically what they did was they took a mold of Chase's head,
Right.
and then they built, you know, like biologically accurate, you know, from the skull outward.
Wow.
And the only sort of change that I had them do from what would really be like biological would be I said, don't put any blood in there. Because I wanted it to not have like a Raiders of the Lost Ark, like his face is literally melting away. I wanted it to be a little bit more like surreal. So
Right.
it's all a head, but there's no blood. And so then what we did was they just made it all out of meltable material, and we hung it upside down and put blacks behind it,
Wow.
and then put, you know, like 8 heat guns on it. And what you have to do is because it takes about an hour for the whole head to melt.
Oh wow.
So you have to run the camera very, very slow. It's something like, it's like 1 frame a second, right? Like the slowest it can possibly go.
Wow.
And so that when you run it at 24 frames a second, you know, you're making it move much faster.
Right.
And so
right. The
then,
motion is all smoother.
yeah, and so basically we did that, and then set it to go, and had somebody stand guard so nobody would bump the camera, and then we went and did other stuff.
Oh, what a nightmare that would be! Would you have to start all? I mean, no. I mean, I guess you could like remove 1 frame if it got accidentally bumped, right? Oh no, it would knock it off its alignment. It would be, you'd have to start all over.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is. But I mean, you just see it's so funny, and you're, you know. This harkens back to the first film that you were a part of, or the first feature, Almost Human, where, you know, which was just a love letter to all practical effects. And it really is, you know, there really is some sort, I can't describe it, but there's something that does not translate in the same way when it's CGI, and that is why the practical, and you know, I feel like it can also affect the way that you're telling a story too. Like, you're gonna make different choices based on what kind of effects you're gonna do if you have to do them in real life versus CGI as well. And yeah, I don't know, it just really added a whole element, especially to the Cronenberg-ness of the film. And my last question before we move on, I don't know how to just, is there like, when you were writing this, when you're making this film, Is there like there's almost like this pseudo, like it's like a Freudian, like Carl Jung, like connection to the game. Was anything like, was there any like sort of like, I don't know, maybe this is a stupid question actually. I'm trying to think of, I don't even know what I'm saying. You know
well,
what? Like,
I think I get you. I mean, I will say that I there wasn't anything specific like, I read some philosophical book or whatever.
Okay.
However, it definitely was my intention that I wanted to basically make Oz in a love triangle where he has this very loving, loving and true relationship with Tess, but then with the game, it's lustful, right?
Yes.
It's like he's sleeping with another woman.
Yes.
And
yes.
So then, and then that other woman gets jealous of Tess. So it's so that is why
you just broke it down for me.
That's why it's so it always is so erotic and draws Oz in, but with Tess it's a lot more predatory.
Oh, hold on 1 second. We just lost our camera because fuck this camera. What the hell? Okay, let's see. Please turn back on. Yeah, so you know what I wrote down when I was watching when he initially grips the joystick, the white joystick, and he's like sort of like, maneuvering those buttons in a very sexual sort of way. My note here was joystick turns into marshmallow sex, and that's kind of how what it reminded me of. It was like marshmallow sex, which I think sort of fits in with what you were saying. So, all right, let's talk Reanimator, because this is like the coolest thing ever. So you played Herbert West on the stage. I mean, this is amazing. Like, especially you're a Reanimator fan. So first of all, congratulations. That's amazing. Number one.
Thanks.
Number two, what on earth is going through your mind when it was Stuart Gordon who was like, I want you to play Herbert West?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a long story as to how I got involved, but to make a long story short, I ended up, getting cast.
Right.
First of all, just getting to audition for Stuart Gordon was a huge honor, getting to meet him and sing for him and read some of the stuff. And it was funny because I hadn't actually watched Reanimator in quite a while before I, got the audition, and the audition really came out of nowhere. I still lived in New York at the time, and my wife and I were in Vegas on vacation, and that was where I got the call saying, hey, could you come straight to LA?
And you dropped
tomorrow?
Everything, right?
Pretty much, yeah. But it was like I spent the drive from Vegas to LA learning the music by just listening to it. And then, I got there and I purposefully, once I got it, I said, gosh, I'm going to I'll watch the trailer for Reanimator just to make sure that I remember West correctly.
Right.
But then I don't want to watch the movie. I don't want to sort of taint what I was going to do. I wanted to just go for it fresh. And it ended up being great. And everything just went really well. And, Stuart calls me and says, I'd like for you to do this. And it was, I was losing my shit.
Wow.
It was absolutely, sort of a not a make or break moment, but just a big moment for me in my career. And, the show was just an amazing experience. First of all, Stuart is such a kind man, and such a genius. And I love his work. But then to see his work ethic, when you're there rehearsing with him,
right.
He was always the first one to arrive and the last to leave. He ran our light board for something like 100 shows.
Wow. Because he's the director.
Yeah.
And, that's...
Yeah.
And he started in theater. It's his foundation of everything. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Truly.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing about Stuart that I really liked in terms of me personally preparing this role, was that I told him, I said, look, I don't want to copy Jeffrey Combs, so I don't want to do just an impression of Herbert West from the movie. I said, I think it's important for me to, make this my own.
Right.
Make him he's still West, but he's my West. And Stuart agreed completely. And, so a lot of the experience was us kind of exploring, just textually, why would West say something like this? What drives West? What are the aspects of his personality, that drive him to act certain ways? Does he kill the cat or not? Things like that.
Question.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. You just brought up something that I brought this up in other episodes, even though this is the first one, people, which you will later discover. So you're familiar with the philosophy, being a screenwriter. Have you heard this philosophy of save the cat?
Sure, yeah.
So my question, from someone who's played Herbert West, you just hearkened on it. Does Herbert West save the cat, and how is that reflected on his character? And I think it it's funny because that's a very particular screenwriting philosophy, but I feel like it is so Reanimator is the perfect, and Herbert West is the perfect example for how that philosophy sort of dictates who he is as his character.
That is a very interesting,
right?
Gosh, that's a really interesting question.
Right?
Okay, so I can't even remember what book it's in, the concept of saving the cat, but
it's called Save the Cat, I think.
Is it called Save the Cat?
Yeah, that's the title.
It's been, I think the last time, I think when I read that was actually in college. So forgive me if I sort of butcher generally the idea of it. I think the best way to answer this is that I think that Herbert saves his own cat. I think that as far as the overall story goes, I think West is completely unconcerned with what is happening, with Meg and Dean Halsey.
Right.
That is, he has absolutely nothing to do with that. He doesn't care. So really it's sort of an interesting movie in that, West is really kind of on his own arc, and he draws, he's going to keep going no matter what, but he draws Kane in to help him. While Kane is struggling with his own arc, and both of those go parallel to each other until they sort of collide like a big car wreck.
Well, what's interesting too is that it's like you have these two guys who are are supposed to be our protagonists, and Kane is he's like us, the audience, and he's witnessing all the stuff. He's the narrator in the short story, and it's like West, who's supposed to be technically the hero too, seems to really what it comes down to is he has a fetish for the experiment. He doesn't care about the outcome. He doesn't care about who is hurt by it. It's all about the fetish of doing the same thing over and over and over again because it placates his ego that he has done what no other human being has done.
Well, I think I'm gonna give you a slight correction on that because sure. I think that it's definitely fetishistic. I think you're right about that, and he's definitely got an obsession. But West's goal is not just to keep doing it because it feels good. West's goal is to perfect the serum.
Right.
And
yes.
and
yes, you're
and
right.
so
You're right.
and so his whole thing, that's what drives him, and the only outcome that he cares about is that he gets better results, which get him closer to the eventual day where he perfects his serum. I mean, West wants to be able to, he wants to defeat death. I mean, what more noble a pursuit can you have? So for him, it's sort of like, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. He doesn't care who gets killed in the process, because he's just so, I mean, me thinking from inside West's head, he just, it's not that he doesn't care about life or death. He cares so much about life that he's willing to sacrifice the world in order to solve this problem. And then, of course, there is then the personal aspect of shoving it in Hill's face.
Yes.
Because the only person with an ego bigger than West is Dr. Hill.
Very true.
And so I think that there is a little bit of a personal vendetta there. But even then, it's sort of like, West is able to, I mean, the fact that he's able to animate the head and the body together is like a gigantic success.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But he's also pissed off because now Hill's out on the loose.
Yeah.
So it's complex, but yeah, I think that the thing about West is that, he wants to solve the problem of death. And so, by the end of the movie, even though he dies in his pursuit, and obviously we're sort of disregarding the two sequels right now.
Right.
That he, even though he dies in his pursuit, he still manages to fling the serum to Dan. He still manages to.
Right. He passes the torch.
He passes the torch. So yeah, I think he has a successful arc. He sacrifices himself for the greater good, just like everyone, gets sort of sacrificed in one way or another. And then Dan, is the one that's ultimately going to continue the pursuit after West is gone.
Now, what's amazing about adapting a movie like Reanimator to the stage, and I got to tell, I know it played in New York in 2012. And I totally missed it. I'm in New York, by the way, and I'm just, bums me out that I missed it. I hope that it comes back because I would really like to see it. But what blows my mind is I can't even, and I've actually Googled, I Googled Graham Skipper Reanimator just to see, like, if I could see any photos of, like, the mechanics, and I see a photo of the famous, removal of the head scene, with the body behind you, and it's like, it looks like a perspective shot, or, the picture is taken at a certain perspective. I'm just like thinking in my head, to do all of these effects in a film is challenging enough. To try and do them live before an audience every single night with as close to a zero margin of error as possible, I can't think of a greater challenge. And so, what was the process with that? I mean, whew.
It was a lot. It was definitely difficult. What I will say is that Stewart has said that part of his inspiration for wanting to do the show in the first place was that he realized that all of the effects that they did in the movie were essentially stage effects. They were, because when he did the Organic Theater Company, they used to do a lot of, like, they did a show called Bloody Bess that was this big sort of gore-soaked pirate show. So they used to do all these effects and stuff on stage. And so then they just sort of like mimicked that, in better quality for the film. And so, when we started working on, like, I think the beheading scene is a perfect example. Basically the way that we did that was, we sort of built a, my desk is more or less like a magician's box.
Right.
And, where the table is positioned, you can't see that there's a hole in the bottom of the tray. And so, what you have is you have the guy that's in the headless suit,
right?
That's hiding the whole
he's waiting to come
the
out.
Desk. and then when, I hit Hill over the head, I step around, I bring the shovel down, And literally when I hit him and he goes down, in a split second, he has switched places with the guy in the headless suit.
Wow.
So that now Dr. Hill is inside the desk. And I, then stab the shovel down onto the floor. Dude in the headless suit sprays me with blood, and you can't see anything because it's all behind this big desk.
Right.
And, and then they have the severed head underneath there. And literally it's so funnily simple, but it's so effective. I carry the severed head around to the front of the desk.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of timing where right as I step in front of the tray that has the hole in it, I drop the head into the hole and the real Dr. Hill shoots his head up. And so the switch has happened. And so then when I inject him, the head magically comes to life.
My God. That blows my mind.
And so it was really all a matter of, and Stuart had it mapped out exactly. He knew exactly what we needed to do.
Right.
So it was just a matter of practice,
right.
and make sure that we, you have to be in exactly the right spot. You have to make sure that all the props work correctly.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes muscle memory. But it was maybe my favorite part of every show.
Oh, I bet.
One of them.
I bet the audience was just blown away. Like, truly.
Oh, it was great. I mean, and also it was so much fun. You're like, it's such a cathartic moment where you're singing and then all of a sudden you're just getting hosed down with blood.
Yeah.
It was great. The whole show was really a magical experience. I loved every second of it, and I too would love for it to come back. I miss it a lot.
Now, I've heard on various podcasts, I know I've listened to the Stewart episode of Killer P.O.V. I don't remember if he was on Shockwaves yet or not, but I know he was trying to get Nevermore off the ground. That did not happen. But I've heard rumblings or various musings that there might be a Reanimator the musical film. Do you think that there's any like shred of hope that is going to happen, or is that just sort of like not like a pipe dream?
I don't have any information on that. I would love for that to be the case.
Yeah, me too.
And let's hope that there's truth to the rumor mill. But
I hope so someday.
Someday I hope. I can say that we have recorded a full cast soundtrack.
Ooh.
So that will be something that will be available at some point in the future, and so that's something I think that people can look forward to at least have the audio version of the show to tide them over.
Very cool, very cool. And I watched that featurette. So Arrow put out the greatest box set for Reanimator ever. There have been a lot of editions of Reanimator, but nothing is definitive, in my opinion, as the Arrow box set that came out, that comes out with the Reanimator comic, and just, it has all the bells and whistles, folks. Go to Arrow, check it out. It is the final period at the end of the sentence for putting out Reanimator in physical media, if you ask me. I don't know if the limited edition is sold out or not yet, but it is beautiful. Check it out, arrow.com. They are not a sponsor. I just love stuff and want to highlight that. Now you mentioned, Graham, something that I find very interesting and very true about when you're doing something, when you're stepping into sacred shoes, so to speak. And here you are stepping into Jeffrey Combs' role, which, it is his role or a lot of people would consider this is Jeffrey Combs and nobody else can be this sort of role. And you said something I find to be very respectable and a very great way to approach it. It's like, instead of you didn't watch Reanimator because you want to find your own truth in the character. You want to bring your own life to the character. And I find that to be true for remakes in general. I think, a lot of people, remakes can be very polarizing. You either love them or you hate them. I think that a good remake, what makes a good remake is that you take the idea and you do something completely different with it. You bring brand new life with it. You're only insulting it if you try to do the exact same thing, because then you're trying to throw your hat in the ring and bring out fan comparison. People are going to compare you to the original because you're doing the exact same thing. And so what I wanted to know is there a remake out there that for you just stands out, besides the three big ones, the holy trinity of the 80s, obviously The Fly, The Blob, and The Thing, which I think can be the general consensus that those are brilliant remakes. Is there a remake out there that really stands out for you more than above all the rest?
Gosh, I mean, yeah, you definitely took the first three right out of my mouth.
Yeah, they're not even worth discussing, Graham, because they're so, like, we all know they're great. It's the holy trinity of what a remake can be, and I'm afraid that everybody will talk about the same three, so I'm taking those out of the equation, Graham. You got to pick something else.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. I defend this movie a lot, and people always shit on me for it, and I've never understood it. I really, really love the remake of Friday the 13th.
Cool.
I like that movie a lot.
I haven't seen it.
It's so straight. Wait, say again?
I haven't seen it. Everybody's telling me it's great. I have to see it. So
yeah,
I respect that.
I really like it. I think that people sort of shit on it because they say it's too slick or Hollywood looking.
So what?
For me, I really it's so exactly straightforward, like what I think of when I think of a Friday the 13th movie. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot under the surface, but I don't need a lot under the surface. It's fun. Yeah. It's super violent. Mm-hmm. I don't particularly care about any of the characters, but that's okay. I don't really need to. It's good popcorn sort of bubblegum. So I really like that one. And then the other, I'll mention two other ones. I love Alexander Aja's The Hills Have Eyes.
Yes.
That is a fantastic remake.
Yes, it is.
That is another remake. I'm going to get burned at the stake for this, but I think it's better than the original.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it does. Yeah.
I think it's great. And I love the original, and of course, Wes Craven is a master. But I just think that movie to me is it's so grimy and disturbing and fucked up. That I love that. And the last one I'll mention is I guess this isn't directly a remake, but it kind of is I'm actually a fan of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
Me too, man. Everybody hates that movie. I think it's great.
Everybody hates it.
Why?
I do not like his first Halloween.
Oh, really? I like the first one too. I like them both. I think he did a good job.
See, the first one, it's definitely a Rob Zombie movie, but to me, it I don't know. There was something about it that it didn't connect with me. I thought, anyway, first one didn't connect with me, but the second one, first of all, I think the first 20 minutes of it are like fucking phenomenal.
Yeah.
But then, even though a lot of people say the rest of the movie falls off, I just find it to be like really brutal, really aesthetically very interesting. I think that it's sort of, I like the White Horse. I like all that stuff.
Yeah, man. It's like dream logic. It gets like surreal in like in the coolest way,
Yeah, I really dig that one. So
cool.
I'll also hold my head up high on that one.
I respect that, and that's why I take away the Blob, the Thing, and the Fly, because then we get cool answers like that. Little Talk of Horrors is brought to you by the Wash Away Seed&Spark campaign. Support indie horror. When you pre-order the already finished feature-length film, Romeo's Distress on Blu-ray, you are directly contributing to the budget of our next feature-length film, Wash Away. Help us make more punk rock movies. Watch the trailer for Romeo's Distress right now.
Cheesecake of love, cheesecake.
Uncle Elmo, have you ever been in love?
Well, there you go on the love thing again. You're always speaking of it. It seems to be the reason behind the actions you've taken.
I even try to forget about her, but I just can't.
What is more important than love?
Nothing.
That's right.
Nothing is more important than love.
That's right. You must just seize the day. Carpe diem.
Carpe diem.
No, scream it. Carpe diem!
I think it's time that we acted.
Like what we talked about.
Family. Can you really put a price on something like that? On your family's security?
I know you're up to something, huh?
How hard can we really go on him,
As hard as we want.
You can do whatever you want to me, but it will never change the fact how much I care about your daughter.
Now we're going to take a little trip. We're going to go back in time, and Graham is on audio, so he can't see what I'm doing right now, but I'm going to do the Wayne's World dream sort of like fantasy flash. We're going to go diddle-doo, 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 diddle-doo. And we are now back in time. And Graham, being that you clearly have an affinity for horror, I like to ask all my guests, was there a moment when in your youth, when you were a child, when you saw something way too young? You saw something that you shouldn't have seen that was way earlier than you should have. A movie, whether it's a horror film or not, because some people's answers are not horror films. But I call this your horror rite of passage. It's what galvanizes you into it's like a trauma, but then it's also at the same time it makes you captivated all at the same time into diving into horror. Did you have a moment like that, Graham?
That is an easy answer to give.
Ooh,
yes.
Good.
It was a major moment for me. So when I was growing up, I used to have a pop-up book of the Universal Monsters.
Gotcha.
And this is when I was a little bitty kid, right? Mm-hmm. And I was always really obsessed with it and obsessed with anything that I knew was scary, but I was always too scared to watch the movies. So, I would at one point, and I was probably 10 years old, my dad bought me this big picture book that it was called Famous Hollywood Movie Monsters or something. And it had all the Universal ones, but then it also had a picture of Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers and Leatherface. And,
that's great.
And all of these characters, right?
Yep.
And it had a little thing about each of them. And I would flip through, and sometimes I wouldn't even read about them because I was too scared to find out what they did. Wow. But they were so striking, and I was fascinated but too scared. But the one picture in that book that scared me above all the others that I couldn't even look at was the picture of Reagan from The Exorcist.
Oh, and then how old were you before you actually face down these films where you're I have to watch these films, or I have to know what's in these movies?
Well, when I was 11 or 12, it was pretty, it was around that age. I finally, my thinking was, I said, okay, I'm too afraid to watch these.
Right.
But I want to watch these. I feel like I should.
Yeah.
So I went, I guess what I need to do is watch the scariest one first.
Ooh.
I need to watch the worst one, and then that way I know I'll be able to handle all the other ones. And so I asked my dad, what is the scariest movie of all time? And as luck would have it, he said The Exorcist, which is what that terrifying image was from.
Right.
And so my dad rented the movie, Blockbuster Kid, because everybody has all these stories of their personal, little video store. For me, it was a local Blockbuster. And I remember I had told all my friends, I said, hey, well, first of all, that next weekend I made them all come over and watch The Exorcist with me. We had a sleepover, and we all watched The Exorcist, and everybody got really scared. And then we started that was every weekend we would have a sleepover, and me and my friends would rent a horror movie. And so I remember at one point I went to it was early on in that, I went to the Blockbuster, and I went up to the counter and I said, because my parents would basically let me rent whatever I wanted. They were pretty loose about that.
Yeah.
And so I went to the guy and I said, I want to get into horror movies. What do I watch?
Wow.
I want to know about horror movies. And he said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I guess Jason and Freddy, and he was like, okay. So what he did, I'm pretty sure this was I remember he gave us 4 movies. And if I remember correctly, it was A Nightmare on Elm Street. It was Friday the 13th, Part 3. It was...
because that's when Jason gets his mask. Huh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then it was Hellraiser.
Huh.
And these were all 4, iconic creatures that I had seen pictures of. And he said, ease yourself into it with these. And then I believe he had us end with Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
He's like a doctor prescribing you. It's like you come in, it's like I have this illness. I have this malady where I need to nourish myself. Doctor, what can you prescribe me?
Exactly. And what was so great about that was it really, it's sort of like, and Halloween was in there too. Maybe he didn't give us no, it wasn't Hellraiser, it was Halloween. Hellraiser came later. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that was, and that was really, that was so much a big part of it. At some point before that, though, before I had sort of asked him for guidance, I used to just like walk up and down the horror aisle and get whatever I thought was cool.
Tell me about the VHS box art. Tell me about your memories of, or did they draw you like a moth to flame? Like, talk about that.
Oh, totally. I mean, the thing was especially having come from a place where I was, already sort of looking at this art from the movies and wondering what are they about,
right?
And being afraid of what they were about. Box art did the same thing. What was so funny was most of the time the box art had nothing to do with the movie that you were putting in anyway.
Right. Right. It was
but it really was. It was such a quick way of being able to like scan the shelves and go, what am I interested in? Like I remember seeing the Cannibal Holocaust box and not being interested in that. I was like, that looks way too gross for me. I don't want that. But then seeing like the Hellraiser box, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like who is that guy?
Yeah. Who is this guy with the
what
nails
is
in his
he
face?
gonna do? And so I think it was a lot of that. I mean, what the movie I was just about to mention was that was one of the very first horror movies that I rented on my own was In the Mouth of Madness.
Ooh.
And I think that it was partially because it, to be honest, that the box art looked a bit tamer than like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween, which in my mind I was like, these are going to be way too scary for me to watch on my own. But then I look at In the Mouth of Madness, I'm like, oh, there's a book and a screaming guy. This looks kind of interesting. And I remember I rented that before I had even seen Halloween. I didn't, all it said was from the director of Halloween, and I knew I'd heard of Halloween, and I knew that Halloween was supposed to be this very, very scary movie. And so I rented In the Mouth of Madness, and I remember I think my parents were having a party or something, and so I was in their bedroom because they had a TV in their bedroom, and I remember watching it, and again just being so blown away by sort of the weirdness of it, the how outside of the box it was, and how I really like, especially as somebody sort of new to like watching and understanding movie structure, that to watch that movie,
it has a real sense of dread. That movie has a real sense of dread to it.
It really does, and really, interesting creatures that you're just not used to. I'm at that point. At that age, you're only really thinking, about like the Frankenstein guy, the vampire, and a werewolf. And then holy shit, what is this tentacle lady doing?
What's very interesting about hearing you talk about, the video store, or waxing poetically about the video store, is that, you star in this film, Beyond the Gates, that begins in a video store and is directed by Jack Stewart. This is his first film too. And it just, you must have been very drawn from, or were you drawn from a lot of these experiences that you're telling me about when trying to play that character?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's to be a movie fan that grew up in the 80s and 90s, the video store is part of your DNA.
Yes.
It is. And I'm not sure it'll ever really be replicated again.
Never.
It was such a special time. And I know this sounds like I'm just sort of waxing nostalgic about it, but, it back then it was so much of a communal experience and such a sort of an experience of hunting around for something that you'd heard of, like the internet was still so nascent that like there weren't even search engines back then, and so you would read hints.
The racks were your search engines. The racks were your search engines.
Exactly. So there was still that element of like, I've got to go on a treasure hunt, and then you would find treasure, and sometimes you'd find garbage, but there was always, the excitement. Like the excitement for me. And I really share this today is getting to share things with my friends. Yeah. Something that I've seen and then getting to show it to them. And so that was, always, and then also just experiencing, just like experiencing new things, right? Like to like, I remember when it was me and my friends, we told our parents that we were going to go see Kull the Conqueror at the movie theater. Yeah. But then we snuck into Event Horizon.
Yo, that is wow.
And it fucked us up.
Yeah, you saw hell.
Yeah, I was not prepared for that movie. But then we had already rented for that night. We had rented Dawn of the Dead. And we had rented, what was the other one? I think Evil Dead 2. I think it was Dawn of the Dead and Evil Dead 2.
Oh, what a double feature, man.
You know,
Hell
and
yeah.
so I remember that night being just such a crazy night of like, you know, it was so funny because our parent, you know, my buddy's mom came to pick us all up after Event Horizon, but we can't tell her we just saw Event Horizon. So we're like, she's like, how was Call the Conqueror? We go, it was so good.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
It was so good.
Oh, man.
You know?
Yeah, I loved it.
And you know, secretly we're like shitting our pants after what we just saw.
Right.
You know, and then we get to go home and then we're like, all right, guys, you know, we got to buckle down. We got to watch these movies.
Right.
And so anyway, all of that said, I think it's just, you know, it's something that is so hard now, I think, to explain to somebody that has grown up in the internet age where it's so much easier to get something directly delivered to you. You know, and I think that's also a little bit what I'm talking about in regards to arcades is that, again, once upon a time, there were not, you know, you couldn't get these games in your home. And if you could, they weren't nearly as impressive as what was in the arcade.
And it was missing the social, there was the social, you're missing the social element as well.
Exactly. And so it was, you know, it's just, it's an interesting sort of time period where, you know, technology was just reaching a point where that sort of stuff could happen, but then, you know, but yet it was before technology was to such a place where we were, you know, where we can essentially be isolated in our own home and never have to leave.
Well, it's funny, and it's funny too because your character, the older gentleman, you know, he's talking to Oz, and he's like, you know, oh man, like, you know, we got to shut this place down. He's like, or he says something along the lines of, I don't know why arcades ever, you know, became unpopular in the first place. And to follow up on what you're saying about, you know, we've lost the movie, the VHS experience or the video store experience. You're right, but at the same time, you know, as you were talking, it suddenly occurs to me, it's not that we've necessarily lost it per se. It has been digitized in the form of now, and you're a member as well as I of the Shockwaves, you know, podcast movie club, and there's a ton of groups like that. And what's happened is it's gone online where, you know, those are the places you go now to talk to your fellow, you know, horror fiend to be like, oh, this is streaming on Prime. This is, you know, this is out, or check this out. You know, oh, I just watched this, and you're always looking for that next elusive gem. So it still exists, but it's not the analog experience. It's not the ritual has totally changed. It's lost a lot of its soul because a lot of, you know, going to the video store is an event. You go to the video store, you look at the back of the boxes, you look at the cover art, you try and decide. Going to the video store is as much of an event as actually watching the movie, and it's an experience that, you're right, that has been lost and will probably never be replicated or has moved to the online age. Now you scroll through Netflix or whatever thing. It's like I could spend so much time just adding to my queue and not even watching a film, like trying to like cultivate my film queue. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not the same. And I have to commend your friend Jackson. You know, I'm listening to the Brian Usna episode of Shockwaves, and he is the perfect guest in the sense that, you know, he is like slowly like coercing Brian Usna into talking, you know, about these like awesome stories that Brian never would have said on his own. And Jackson just sort of like nudges him. He like interjects every once in a while just to nudge, and gets the best stuff. That was such a pleasure to listen to that. So the next time you see Jackson, you tell him, you give him a tip of my hat for that. That was,
I will.
Do you feel like taking our Terra Trivia Challenge?
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay, because it sounds like you're pretty knowledgeable. So I'm going to throw you some questions. I don't expect you to necessarily know the answers. Again, I really suck at coming up. This has been a very hard part for me of the show, like trying to come up with like good questions to ask. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You will do your best to answer them. And then our last segment is 5 recommendations. So building upon what we were just talking about with the video store experience, you are going to recommend to whoever is watching this show 5 picks, streaming or not. When I say streaming, I mean legally streaming over subscription paid services, movies that you would recommend. Okay?
Okay, great.
Okay, fantastic. Are you familiar with this film?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful. In the film Shakma, what game are all the kids playing in the hospital before they are confronted by the title monster, Shakma?
Dungeons and Dragons.
That's right. Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, very good, very good. 2 for 5. Wow. This is the first time, folks. This is the first time.
Oh, wow.
Let's see here. All right. I'm going to throw you all right, this one's a little bit more difficult. Okay, ready? Are you familiar with the band The Misfits?
A little bit.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you it anyway because I gave you 2 questions they already got. So you may or may not get this. This horror film is mentioned in the Misfits song Earth AD from the album Earth AD.
Yeah, I do not know that album, but I'm going to guess based on the title that they talk about, Earth AD.
Listen,
is it Alien?
No, it's not. This was a very difficult question, though, so I commend you for trying. The answer is The Hills Have Eyes. And
The Hills Have Eyes. Okay,
yes, and you should.
Right.
I don't know how much you dig the Misfits, but you should totally listen to that song when we're done here because it's a great song. But you got to be into hardcore music to enjoy it. Okay. All right. Here's another challenging question, but I think you're gonna get this. We're gonna go for it. Ready?
I shall do my best.
Night of the Living Dead is based on this novella story by Richard Matheson and...
Oh, I Am Legend.
Okay, good. And for the second part of that question, was also later adapted into these 4 films in chronological order.
Whew. Okay, so 4 films in addition to Night of the Living Dead?
Yes.
And in chronological
And you have to include Night of the Living Dead in them.
So Night of the Living Dead is one of the 4.
No, I'm sorry. You know what? My bad. 5 films. One of them is Night of the Living Dead. I'm so sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, all good. Okay, so, well, the first one's obviously Night of the Living Dead. Then, God, the chronological order one is hard. I know that Omega Man is one of them.
Okay. Listen, if you don't get it in chrono, I'll give you half credit because that part's kind of hard.
Gosh, I'm trying to think.
You got 2 right so far, obviously. You got Omega Man and Night of the Living Dead so far.
And then obviously I Am Legend would be the most recent one.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
2 more.
I'm trying to think here.
Do you want a lifeline? I'll give you 1 lifeline.
Sure, give me one.
Okay. This film starred Vincent Price.
Okay, I thought it might be a Vincent Price one. Gosh, I am not very good with his old filmography.
Well, you better dive into it because it's a great filmography. Something.
Yeah, no, I know.
Explore.
I mean, like with Vincent Price, I know. Obviously, I know The Fly. I know.
Right.
And I know. Dr. Phibes and all that stuff. I'm trying to think though. With. Oh gosh.
I'll give you one more hint.
I'll
give you one more hint. It is also in the public domain.
Oh, gosh.
All right, I'm just going to give it to you. Ready?
Just give it to me.
It's The Last Man on Earth.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah. Right.
Which also predates Night of the Living Dead. So it goes Night of the Living Dead. It goes Last Man on Earth, 1964. Night of the Living Dead, 68. Omega Man, 72. And then the last film is I Am Legend in 2007. And then there's one more that also came out in 2007 that came after I Am Legend. Do you want to take a stab, or should I just tell you?
Is it it came out in 2007?
2007 or 2008. I'm pretty sure it was 2007. And the reason being, it is a mockbuster. For those unfamiliar with what a mockbuster is, it's when a title comes out that is a rough approximation of a very popular mainstream film. Like I Am Legend was a big budget adaptation.
So it was like something like I Am Myth or something like that?
Something like that. And basically what they're hoping is that when you're renting it at Redbox or whatever, or at the video store, that you're going to mistakenly pick up the wrong title thinking that it's this film. And that's how they make their money, folks. Or at least that's how they did. I don't know how it is done today.
I didn't even know about that one. What's that one called?
That one is called I Am Omega. It was released by Asylum. And it stars...
Sounds like an Asylum movie.
Yes, and it stars the dude from Double Dragons and the Crow TV series, Mark Dacascos. He plays...
Oh, the guy from Iron Chef.
Yes, I was about to say, he plays the chairman on Iron Chef. In the words of my uncle,
Yeah.
Hayakiki! Yeah. So yeah, that is the fifth one. Listen, that was I'm going to commend you, Graham, because that was a very challenging question. I thought that would be a really good, fun, challenging question. So I'm going to give you half credit for the Night of the Living Dead. Well done. I don't know where you are. How many did you get right? Are you 3 for 5 right now?
No, I think I'm 2.5.
Okay, 2.5. Okay. Okay, we're down to.
No, 2.5 for 4.
2.5 for 4. Right. Okay. Final question. Ooh. Okay. Here's a question. Considering that we've been talking about Reanimator, 2008 almost saw the return of Herbert West with this title. Again, I don't know how real this title is, but from the scuttlebutt at the time, this was the title, and this was the particular scenario.
Yeah, it was House of Reanimator.
Right.
And the idea was that West was he was the Surgeon General, or he was just in the White House.
Right.
But basically the president dies, and West has to resurrect him to continue to run the country.
And I heard that William H. Macy was in running, or that was in talks before it fell apart, or whatever the scenario was, that William H. Macy would play the president and Barbara Crampton would have been the first lady, which would have been amazing. I wish that movie...
And George Wendt was going to be the vice president.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Did not realize that. It's funny. They, sometimes when these movies don't happen, or sometimes you hear about these amazing scripts and then they never come out, or they're never going to see movie form. But I really hope that House of Reanimator somehow, like Dynamite or Dark Horse or somebody, adapts that into a comic, because boy, that's a great story. I would love to see what that story was all about. So listen, Graham,
yeah, I would too.
I commend you. You did very well for horror trivia. I was very impressed with your knowledge. You are truly a horror fan indeed. And now for our final segment, Graham is going to give us his Furious 5 streaming or otherwise picks. These are all titles that are streaming legally, or picks that can be procured via Blu-ray from one of the amazing any one of the companies out there that are doing these sort of releases, or via Amazon.com or Shout Factory or Scream Factory or whatever, what have you. So with that, Graham, what are your 5 picks?
Let's see. Well, keeping with Stuart Gordon, I would recommend everybody watch From Beyond.
Hell yes.
It was his follow-up to Reanimator, and it's fantastic.
Yes.
And
who put that out?
I'm sorry?
And that's put out by Scream Factory, people. You can get that at screamfactory.com. I actually just picked it up on their last sale, and it has so many gorgeous Blu-ray, special features. You want to own this film. Trust me, it's worth owning. So check that out at screamfactory.com. Sorry, Graham, go ahead.
No problem. So yeah, next we'll go with the Cronenberg film, since we've been talking about Cronenberg. I highly recommend Dead Ringers.
Ooh.
A lot of people don't really know that movie. It's one of his more subtle movies.
Indeed.
But it's still really fucked up. I think it's beautiful and tragic. And I think Scream Factory also put out a disc of that.
They did. They did.
You can find Dead Ringers around. It's phenomenal. This is another lesser-known horror film that I've been revisiting recently. It's from Alejandro Jodorowsky. It's called Santa Sangre.
Yes.
Santa Sangre is a story about a young boy in the circus, and his mother gets her arms chopped off by an angry lover.
So
and
weird.
So he has to become her arms. It's super trippy, super weird.
And unique. It's so unique. It's just like there's nothing like it There's nothing like it out there.
So definitely check out Santa Sangre. And then 2 more. I will go with Larry Fessenden's movie Wendigo.
Ooh.
I'm a big fan of Larry Fessenden, and of course I got the chance to work with him on The Mind's Eye.
Right.
He's one of my favorite horror filmmakers.
He's great. He's truly great.
And Wendigo for me is sort of his most magical movie. I really love that film. And then finally, off the top of my head, last one I can think is a movie that came out a few years ago called The Battery by my good friends.
Jeremy Gardner?
Sorry, thanks. Got distracted. Jeremy Gardner and Christian Stella. and those guys made this movie for like $6,000.
Yep.
And it's like the best episode of Walking Dead you'll ever see.
Yep.
It's really great. I love that film a lot. You guys should definitely check it out. It's sort of a perfect example of what is possible with independent filmmaking.
I'd just like to say a last note about the battery for a few different reasons. First of all, you can get the battery from screamfactory.com. I believe it's also available on Shudder, and I believe it's also available on Prime, or at least it was. And you can also get it directly from their website. And if you really want to support the filmmakers, go to their website and pick it up. I believe that they have it available. And this film is, I have a deep personal connection to it. It inspired me to make my own feature-length film, Romeo's Distress. And it really is an example that all you need is a couple $1,000s and a DSLR and a good idea, and you can go out there and make a film. And there's an excellent behind-the-scenes documentary called The Tools of Ignorance that's on that disc, and it details how they made the film, and it's very inspiring. So if you're a filmmaker or you're thinking about getting into making movies, totally pick that up and watch it. It may inspire you greatly to go out there and go at it. So listen, Graham.
Yes.
Thank you so much for doing this. You have the honor of being the pilot episode, and I'd just like to, again, folks, let you know that Sequence Break is streaming on Shudder exclusively. Get your subscription at Shudder. Go check out Sequence Break. It really is a magical film, and it's hard to believe that this is a film from a first-time writer-director. It really is a solid first film. And so go to Shudder.com. If you don't have your subscription, check it out. And Graham, thank you again so much. You rule, dude. You really do. Well, that concludes our first episode. We're going to now cut to our sponsor.
Life is not fair. It's not. It's just chaos. Swirling chaos. We're just dealt the cards and we have to play them the best we can. We have to accept that. The sooner we can, the sooner we can get on with life. But sometimes we get lucky.